It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and the BBC scandal saga rolls on. Should the BBC star name themselves? There's strong views on either side of this. I'll be talking to Tory MP Michael Fabricant. I'll also be talking to Harvey Proctor, who, of course, was victim to malicious false accusations. In other news, yes, would you house an asylum seeker in your own home? A think tank has come out and said that maybe you should, to take the pressure off the government. Thoughts on that? And talking of asylum seekers as well, we are going to go live to the scene of a Welsh town where they are now blockading a migrant hotel. It is fascinating stuff there to see a community kind of rising up against what they see as a massive intrusion in their local area. And finally, yes, the BBC Rich List has been revealed. See who tops the list, see who's fallen down it, see who's got the taxpayer-funded pay rises. It's all go here. Patrick Christys, GB News. Yes, get those comments coming in, gbviews at gbnews.com. Strong views on either side of this, but do you think that the BBC star in question should name themselves? gbviews at gbnews.com. Also, of course, would you house an asylum seeker in your own home? But right now, it's your headlines.
Very good afternoon. It is 1:01 here in the GB newsroom. The BBC's Director General has admitted he hasn't spoken to the presenter who's been suspended after being accused of paying a teenager for explicit images. In an interview with Radio 4, Tim Davie also said the corporation attempted to contact the young person's family just twice after their initial complaint. The BBC has paused its investigation while police look into possible criminal activity. Now, a lawyer for the young person, who's now aged 20, says nothing unlawful happened. Separately, the BBC's published details of its highest-paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the top-paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball's the highest-paid female presenter. She earns more than £980,000. Ukraine's president says it's absurd not to set a time frame for his country's NATO membership. World leaders are currently discussing the alliance at a summit in Lithuania. President Zelensky says the uncertainty provides motivation for Russia to continue its terror. Well, the Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, insists Ukraine will be given security guarantees.
I also expect that allies will send a clear and positive message on the path forward towards membership for Ukraine. I have proposed a package of 3 elements with more practical support with a multi-year program to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and the NATO forces. This will move Ukraine closer to NATO.
Joe Biden's former Chief of Staff, Susan Platt, told GB News the US will continue to back Ukraine in its war against Russia, but NATO membership won't happen until the conflict is over.
The U.S. has done everything they can in support of the war in Ukraine against Putin's army, and will continue to do that. I think there's time for everything, and I think it's great that we now have really a pretty much of a brick wall by including Finland and Sweden. Thank you to Mr. Erdogan joining in the NATO alliance against Russia.
Now, a man's been found to have killed a 9-year-old girl by stabbing her in broad daylight as she played outside the shop where her mother was working. Lilia Valutita died from a single stab wound to the chest in Boston last July. 23-year-old Devadas Skebas was charged with her murder, but has been deemed unfit to stand trial due to his mental health. He's expected to be given a hospital order, the only possible sentence. MPs are considering amendments to the illegal migration bill as the government attempts to get it through the House of Commons. Changes include limiting the detention periods of unaccompanied children and pregnant women. And the legislation will no longer be used retrospectively against people already in the UK. The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, told MPs in the House he disagrees with many of the changes proposed, describing them as a wrecking ball. The draft legislation suffered a record 20 defeats in the House of Lords. Mortgage rates have hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.66%. That's the highest level since the financial crash of 2008. The Bank of England has continued to raise its interest rate levels in an effort to bring down inflation. However, the pace of wage growth has also risen again, prompting fears of a further hike in interest rates next month. Average weekly pay is 7.3% higher in the 3 months to May compared with last year, matching the joint highest figures since records began 22 years ago. The Office for National Statistics also revealed unemployment rose unexpectedly over the quarter to 4%. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled two-time Olympic champion Caster Semenya has been discriminated against by World Athletics. The 800-metre runner has a condition which means she produces a higher level of testosterone. Now, she was banned from competing after refusing to take drugs that would lower her testosterone levels. The court ruled it violated her human rights and she's not been given sufficient safeguards following her complaint. Finally, train fares could be reduced under a plan to encourage more competition on Britain's railways. New research says allowing multiple operators to run services on the same line leads to better services, cheaper fares and newer trains. Rail Partners, which carried out the research, and they represent private train companies, they're calling for open access to allow companies to compete for customers, like in many other European countries. This is GB News. More as it happens. Now it's over to Patrick.
Right, loads on today. So we are going to be talking about whether or not you would house an asylum seeker in your own home. That appears to be the latest scheme in order to take the pressure off the government and the taxpayer. As far as I can see, that is literally making the taxpayer pay twice. We'll be talking about all of that and going to Wales, where there are ongoing protests, a blockade, in fact, over at Migrant Hotel there. But let's be honest, there really is only one place to start, and that is the BBC scandal. So the latest is that the Director General of the BBC has admitted that he's not yet spoken to the presenter alleged to have paid a young person for sexually explicit photos. Tim Davie also revealed that no member of BBC management talked to the presenter about the allegations for almost 2 months after the first complaint was made, with a conversation only happening last Thursday. There was also claims of them trying to contact the family just twice, once apparently via email and once via a phone call, but the phone call never went through. The microscope, I think, now really is on whether or not the BBC have acted appropriately. Let's go to our reporter Mark White, who's outside New Broadcasting House for us. Mark, thank you very, very much. Quite a lot to go at in the last couple of hours. Just whiz us through it. And the police have also asked the BBC to stop with their own investigation, haven't they? So do us a little roundup, please.
Yeah, well, Scotland Yard confirming that they have indeed asked the BBC to suspend their internal investigation for the time being while they scope out the evidence that they've been given to determine whether it meets the threshold for a formal criminal investigation. So until they're finished that process, the BBC cannot continue with its internal investigations. But Tim Davie, who should have been announcing the corporation, indeed he was announcing the corporation's annual report, found himself instead answering question after question on this scandal that has currently rocked the corporation, and they gave a fascinating timeline really into the events following these complaints. Now, what they tell us is that on the 18th of May, the complainant, a family member, turned up at the BBC at a building where they made a complaint about the behaviour of a BBC presenter. Then on the 19th of May, the complainant contacted BBC Audience Services, and the allegations were referred to the BBC's corporate investigations team. Now, also on the 19th, that team assessed that the allegation as very serious and said that the BBC maintains, though, that the complaint that they received did not include an allegation of criminality. And still on the 19th, the investigations team then emailed the complainant stating how seriously the BBC takes such allegations and seeking some more information, but they say they got no response. nothing more was done in an effort, it seems, to contact the complainant until 2.5 weeks later, when a phone call was made, telephone call to the complainant, but that did not connect. And then again, nothing else happened. No other email, no phone call, until the son contacted the family, contacted the BBC, sorry, on the 6th of July to share the allegations and the fact that they were about to splash with that story the very next day. Only at that point, Patrick, on the 6th of July, did the BBC then assign a senior manager to speak to the presenter concerned. Now, they've mounted somewhat of a defence in saying the reason the BBC presenter was not spoken to is because the initial allegations, although assessed as very serious, did not, it seems, also contain an allegation of criminality. However, if an allegation is assessed as very serious, I think most people would wonder why a person at the centre of those allegations was not spoken to for almost 2 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, look, thank you very, very much. That's Mark White there, our reporter outside New Broadcasting House. We will be going back and forth to Mark White throughout the course of this show for any updates. But lots of different points of controversy around this at the moment. Huge differences of opinion about whether or not the BBC presenter in question should either be named or name themselves for a variety of different reasons. And there's a big discrepancy as to whether or not it is indeed the BBC or the Sun that has more to prove in this particular situation. To kind of pick through this quagmire, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP, Sir Michael Fabricant. Michael, thank you very, very much. It's great to have you on the show. Lots of talk today in the tabloids, more than the broadsheets, as it were, about whether or not MPs should use parliamentary privilege to name the BBC star in question. What would your view as an MP be on that?
Well, parliamentary privilege does have to be used responsibly and carefully. At present, we've got both the accused denying it, I understand, and also the accuser now saying it's all rubbish through local lawyers. So I don't think we should be naming people until we know guilt, because, you know, it's so easy to damage someone's reputation otherwise. We need to be very responsible, I think.
OK, and a little bit later on, I'm going to be talking to Harvey Proctor, who, of course, had some devastating personal experiences with having his name dragged through the mud, horrific accusations that were completely false. And so I'll be keen to get his view. One thing that he tweeted last night was about whether or not the individual in question here should reveal themselves. So get in front of the story, as it were, and have their version of events put forward. What would your view on that be?
Well, you can say, of course, that the best form of defence is attack. And if you've been wrongly accused, one argument, the one being put forward, and it's a perfectly reasonable argument, being put forward by Harvey Proctor, is to say, look, come out straight away, defend yourself and put an end to it. On the other hand, if you're innocent and you've got, I don't know, you've got wife, children maybe, you might feel, look, leave it to the police, let them deal with it, and maybe clear the whole thing up very rapidly, and we can move on from there. But what's so worrying, I think, with the BBC is they're saying, and I quote, the BBC have pledged to learn lessons and review the existing complaints procedure. And this follows on from that 2-month delay, which you and Mark White were explaining. But, you know, this also follows on from Jimmy Savile. And not quite the same thing, but Philip Schofield on ITV. You know, how many lessons do there need to be before they're learned?
And there obviously is procedure. I'll come on, actually. I'll return to the BBC's internal protocol. Tim Davie was talking earlier on. I wanted to focus on the Sun, if that's all right. I wonder whether or not it is time to put up or shut up for the Sun, and whether or not, if they do have absolute cast-iron proof, and there's talk of bank statements and all of this stuff, whether or not actually they should be fronting up with that now.
Well, if the Sun has cast iron proof of someone's guilt, they've got nothing to lose by printing that person's name, and it's in the public interest that they should. But if there's any doubt, that's probably why they're not putting up and shutting up.
OK, yeah, interesting. And look, this is going to be, these are ongoing discussions that will be had over the course of this day and no doubt are happening at certain media offices as we speak at the moment. Let's return to the BBC then. Now, a couple of interesting things here. So, as I understand it, anyway, it took around 2 months for them to contact the individual concerned and senior management at the BBC. That senior manager at the BBC, Tim Davie, says that he has still had no contact directly with the individual concerned in all of this. So there's that side of things. There's that delay. There's also, again, this notion that if they received a complaint that they deemed to be very, very serious, and they are saying that they did deem it to be very, very serious, they tried to contact the family who turned up at the office by email and one phone call that didn't connect. What do you make of that? Is that enough? Is that proper procedure, do you think?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it's thorough. I don't think it's the sort of thing that normal, large commercial companies would do or not do in this case. I think the BBC hasn't learned by its past experience and hasn't been vigorous enough. And if this individual is as high profile as is rumoured, you would think that Tim Davie, the Director General, before suspending that person, that chap, would have called him into the office and asked him, you know, what's going on here? I want to know, as Director General, as head of the BBC, precisely what's going on. Is there anything here that the BBC needs to be worried about from its reputation point of view? I'm quite sure that if a similar thing had happened in GB News, then Angelo, the chief executive of GB News, would call the guy in straight away and say, look, is there any truth to this? I just find this sort of rather distant and slow approach not very professional in the hands of the BBC, particularly, as I say, we've had the Philip Schofield affair and, of course, the dreadful Jimmy Savile affair. No lessons at all seem to have been learned.
It will be interesting to see how this pans out. It has ebbed and flowed massively in the last 24 hours, this story, from the initial allegations being put out there and made public to a statement by the individual's legal team. There is a big question mark, and I will be discussing this a little bit later on in the show. The mum of the person involved in all of this has apparently said, how are their legal fees being paid? Which I think I will be looking at some possible...
and that's a fair question to ask, by the way. This boy is supposed to have been a drug addict. He was supposed to be using money to buy drugs, which in itself is a separate issue. But how could he afford, unless, you know, and that's also a possibility. Maybe the boy has a legal team working pro bono, in other words, for no fee. We don't know. There are so many questions to be answered.
There are so many questions to be answered. And Michael, we are going to leave it there anyway. I just want to clarify something, though, and not that we're particularly in the business of misgendering too many people here on GB News, but they have always been referred to as they. So far, or the young person. So we'll leave that at a minor point of clarification there. But thank you very much. So Michael Fabricant there, Conservative MP. Great to have your insights on at the show there. Like I said, a little bit later on, I'm going to be talking to Harvey Proctor, who was dragged through the absolute ringer with depraved allegations, which turned out, of course, to be completely false. And I said yesterday on this show that I thought, in my personal view, that the individual in question at the BBC should either be named or should name themselves. That was my view, that is my view, and I know that divides people. Get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.com. That predominantly centred around the idea that other people were being dragged into this. Harvey Proctor spoke up. He completely disagreed with me on that. Completely disagreed with me. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. But he then came out and tweeted, if I were the BBC presenter, I would throw a press conference to broadcast the truth. And that is something that I'm going to be talking to him about. Should this individual be getting in front of the story? Should they be naming themselves? But you get loads more on this story on our website. Go to gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got all the best analysis, big opinion, and the latest breaking News. And of course, we do as well, actually, still have our GB News campaign, which is to stop the UK becoming a cashless society. The campaign is called Don't Kill Cash. It's proving hugely popular. The petition that we launched last Monday, well, today, we've passed the 200,000 mark. We've actually passed it. Great stuff. It is currently at 204,000 people having signed that. Great stuff. Be a part of it. The petition is on our website. It's gbnews.com/cash. Or if you've got a smartphone, you'll see a QR code on your screen right now if you're watching us on telly or online. Just hold it over that and it'll take you straight to that page. Help GB News with our campaign. Just tell the authorities don't kill cash. We don't want to lose something that we've already got. But get a load of this, OK? This is going to be a big one for us. I'm going to be running with this throughout the course of the show. I will discuss a new report that claims that people, you, me, everyone we know, should let channel migrants, asylum seekers as well, stay in their own homes to cut the asylum seeker bill. I find that quite possibly a visible sign of a complete and utter capitulation. And frankly, is that not us being asked to do far too much? Are we not already doing enough in terms of the taxpayer amount of money, hotels in local communities, etc.? I'm asking straightforwardly, would you ever consider housing an asylum seeker in your own home? Just quickly, they want to roll out that Ukraine scheme for Iraqis, Afghanistans, Iranians and Syrians. Key difference, though, for me, with the Ukrainian scheme to those. The Ukrainian refugees are mostly women, aren't they? We'll talk about that very shortly. But first, it's your weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow and again. You will be dodging the downpour, some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still one or two heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, here is a question for you. Would you house a channel migrant in your own home? That's what a new report is suggesting. Patrick Christys on GB News, and we will be getting stuck right into that very shortly here on Britain's News Channel. Well, I will have the very latest on the BBC presenter scandal, and I will cross live to South Wales as a row continues after 95 staff lost their jobs. More than 200 migrants are set to move into a hotel where they used to work. The latest development is that the locals have barricaded the entrance. They've got marquees going up. There's huge police presence at the scene as well. I will be going there. It's a fascinating example of what I suspect plenty of other local communities maybe wish they'd done a little bit earlier on. But here is a question for you, same but different. Would you open your own doors to let a channel migrant stay at your home? Well, that is something that Policy Exchange think tank are suggesting, along with, of course, other versions of asylum seekers, to reduce the annual £2.2 billion cost of keeping asylum seekers in hotels. So more than 13,000 migrants have now crossed the channel in small boats this year, and that's 1,500 arriving since Friday. We are now on course to match or indeed beat last year's record total. So I'm joined by Dr. Rakib Hassan, who's a senior advisor at the Policy Exchange. Easy for me to say. Rakib, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. A few different elements to this for me. They were looking at opening up, tapping into the goodwill of the British people and community spirit. And I understand that, but is the goodwill of the British public and community spirit not already being stretched to the absolute max by the eye-watering taxpayer cost and the use of local hotels against the will of the local people?
Well, absolutely. And Patrick, I'm really glad you invited me, because I think that my report, which I personally authored, has been misrepresented in a variety of ways. Well, I actually say in the report that far too long, the traditional generosity of underprivileged working class communities has been taken for granted when it comes to the resettlement of asylum seekers. Some people would say illegal economic migrants. So what I actually suggest in the report is that wealthier, more privileged, liberal-minded parts of the country, where housing costs may be high, but people may well have the private resources to personally rehome migrants, we should explore that possibility, because those parts of the country have traditionally more liberal attitudes. I'd be talking about one area, for example, would be St Albans in Hertfordshire, which is not too far away from my hometown of Luton. Then let's explore those opportunities, because the reality is, as I say in the report, my personal estimate when it comes to the one-year cost of rehoming migrants in hotels is £2.2 billion. Patrick, that's 3.5 times more than the UK government's budget for homelessness, which is 630 million for 2022-23. It's also a larger amount than the entire pot of funding for levelling up. Round two of the Levelling Up Fund, which is 2.1 billion. So what I'm arguing for actually is looking at ways how wealthier, more liberal-minded parts of the country can help out, or in a sense, some would say, put their money where their mouth is.
Put their money where their mouth is. And this is why, one of the reasons why I found what you're saying so fascinating, because it is at now putting it on those people. All too often when you see these kind of refugees welcome marches and all of that stuff, and they're asked, well, would you house someone in your own home? And they go, oh, sorry, I haven't got the space. And, you know, it's a classic. They clearly want somebody else to do it. So you think that people who now essentially have the room, dare I say it as well, maybe elements of the Church of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury, who sit on quite large estates, they should be really the ones now saying, look, I tell you what, we will help the government out and we will help the taxpayer out and we will actually house these people?
No, absolutely, because I think that for far too long, I think that we saw the large-scale disorders in Knowsley last February outside the 4-star Suites Hotel. If anyone knows Knowsley reasonably well, there's a severe shortage in sustainable, good quality social homes. So for then the Home Office, with very little notice to the council, to relocate asylum seekers to a 4-star hotel, that's not a sustainable state of affairs, Patrick. I think that we need to look at our refugee and asylum policy very differently. And I believe that as it stands, and for far too long, the traditional generosity which characterises working class communities across the UK has been taken for granted and taken advantage of.
Yeah, no, indeed. There is a key point of distinction, though, isn't there, as well, between the Ukrainian rollout scheme and people from, say, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria and Iraq.
Absolutely.
And one of those differences is the gender of a lot of these people. Let's be honest, with you, Ukrainian tended to be women and children, and the other side of things disproportionately is not. And I wonder whether or not that's a key factor in actually blocking some of these kind of wealthy liberal elites from wanting people in their own homes. They go, oh, I don't really want a young man.
Absolutely, and that was a point that I made in the report. It's something I think we discussed in one of our previous conversations, that because there were such strong restrictions on men leaving Ukraine in order for them to help with the war effort against Russia, when it comes to the Homes for Ukraine scheme in the UK, that primarily involves women and children, and people understandably are more willing and more open to rehoming women and children, even in their own private household. So what I call for in this new report is a new annual cap being introduced for refugees, which is democratically decided by the UK Parliament. And under that cap, Patrick, women and children, especially in conflict-affected territories where they're at major threat of sexual violence, they're prioritised under that cap. Because I think that that would lead to a more streamlined asylum system, which is more welcome, which is more workable, and will be able to galvanise voluntary spirit that way.
Yeah, look, Rakib, look, thank you very, very much for coming on and for explaining, I think, in a lot more detail exactly the context of this report. It's Dr. Rakib Hassan there, who is the Senior Advisor at the Policy Exchange. Just very, very quickly, gbviews@gbnews.com. I was asking you whether or not you would house an asylum seeker. The short answer is no, says Elizabeth. No way. I wouldn't, and that's because they are mostly men, and that is from David, and that is a point that is going to be echoed, I think, throughout the course of this show. Look, loads more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. As the BBC presenter Scandal rumbles on, I will speak to a former Tory MP who was once falsely accused of being a paedophile. He has got strong views on whether or not that BBC star should be named and what will happen indeed next. I'm also going to be going to Wales, of course, which is the scene of this ongoing dispute between locals and a migrant hotel. Fascinating developments in that. But now it's your headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it's 3:33. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The chairman of Ofcom says he doubts the allegations involving an unnamed BBC presenter will become a matter for the media regulator. Asked whether the family of the young person may have recourse to escalate the issue, Baron Michael Grade said the BBC's board must take full responsibility for the crisis. The BBC's paused its investigation while police look into possible criminal activity. A lawyer for the young person, who is now aged 20, says nothing unlawful happened. Separately, the BBC's published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball's the highest paid female presenter with £980,000, although salaries paid through the BBC's commercial arm or through independent production companies don't have to be disclosed. Ukraine's president says it's absurd not to set a time frame for his country's NATO membership. World leaders are currently discussing the alliance at a summit in Lithuania. President Zelensky says the uncertainty provides motivation for Russia to continue its terror. A man's been found to have killed a 9-year-old girl by stabbing her to death as she played outside the shop where her mother was working. Lilia Valutita died from a single stab wound to the chest in Boston last July. The 23-year-old Dividas Skabas was charged with her murder, but was deemed unfit to stand trial due to his mental health. He's expected to be given a hospital order. And mortgage rates have jumped to a 15-year high as lenders appeared before MPs to address concerns about struggling homeowners. The average rate of a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.6%, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The Bank of England raised its benchmark rate to 5% last month in an effort to bring down inflation. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2904 and €1.1746. The price of gold, £1,498.73 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,265 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Yeah, well, look, very shortly I'm hoping to have a chat with Harvey Proctor, who was, of course, falsely accused of absolutely depraved and awful things not so long ago, and it shattered his reputation for a period of time anyway. He's got strong views on this BBC presenter scandal. Yesterday, I said that the individual involved should be named, or they should name themselves, or an MP should name them. Predominantly, I was basing that around the idea that other people were being dragged into this needlessly. I was also arguing about a public interest situation there, and I still back that. Harvey was very much against that, but what Harvey was saying last night, and I hope we'll come on to say very, very shortly anyway, is that actually the individual in question here should call a press conference themselves, do what he did, and get in front of the story and set the record straight. And that is an interesting way of doing it. I want to know whether or not you think that that's something that should happen. But just while we wait a second or two for Harvey, I just want to return to one of the big stories that we're talking about today, which is about whether or not Brits should be expected to throw their doors open to asylum seekers in this country to help cut the government cost. I want to emphasise again the exact cost, which is expected, by the way, apparently to rise to somewhere in the region of 11 billion in the next couple of years. It also broke on the day of another story, which is that the Home Office is apparently spending £500,000 a day on 5,000 empty hotel rooms in preparation. They're block booking these rooms in preparation to be moving people in. So as we currently speak now, apparently there are around 5,000 empty hotel rooms, which you and I and everyone we know are paying for in order to wait for them to be filled by people who've potentially just crossed the English Channel. Is this really, should it ever really, be onto the British taxpayer to then throw their own doors open to help the government out of a mess of their own creating? I am convinced that we are living, ordinary British people are living with the ongoing nightmare of political failures. Our MPs and our House of Lords are ultimately, as things stand, unable to get to grips with what's going on in the Channel. And whilst they dither and delay, and whilst they pontificate about what's right, what's wrong, etc., then, frankly, we are all here paying the price and we are all suffering. But as if by magic, we've managed to actually pull up another guest on an equally important topic, which ties in. And that's what's been going on in Wales. Now, we were talking yesterday, weren't we, about local Welsh residents in, and I've been practising this, Llanelli, essentially barricading outside a hotel to try to stop it being used as a migrant hotel. 95 people lost their jobs there. By my calculations, around 20,000 people in the UK have already lost their jobs as a result of asylum seeker hotels popping up, let alone, of course, the loss to various things like £300 million regeneration projects in places like Scampton, for example. But let's just get an update now on a story that I covered yesterday, which is this Llanelli Hotel in South Wales. 95 staff lost their job. Protesters have started to erect marquees outside the hotel in Stradey Park, while organisers say that they've been provided with food as they continue to fight this decision to house asylum seekers there. I'm going to bring in now local resident Steve Williams. You might remember him from yesterday, but it's always good to get an update. Steve, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me again. So, yes, as I understand it, there are now marquees going up. There's food being made available. Essentially, you lot are setting up camp there. But this is a really interesting point of distinction between the hotel at this site and some other ones, which is, again, Steve, I think this is surrounded by private roads, is it? Which means that, actually, in order to get access to this particular hotel, people have to have permission, and they're not getting permission, are they?
It's a road at the moment that's under contestation who actually owns the property. It's clear that it's not shown on the Stradey Park Hotel's plot of land in which they own and all the rest of it. The hotel itself used to be known as what's called the Bryn y Mawr, which is an old Georgian townhouse. Now, it had a large estate, and that has been split up into many areas, and the front area is not actually connected directly to the Stradey Park Hotel. It is quite a small area, and some of the local residents have allowed access to it just to support the economy realistically, and for it when it was a hotel. Okay, and that has obviously changed now from being a hotel.
Yeah, so we currently have a situation where there is a 24-hour blockade taking place, isn't there? And it's an incredibly wide age range of people who appear to be doing this blockading, isn't that right?
Yeah, it is. We've got teenagers up to the people in their 80s that are prepared to do it. We have 24-hour shift coverage there. The general belief is there that people are going to make a stand on this occasion rather than regret at later days that they didn't have that opportunity to do it. Now, we're in it for the long haul, as you can see from the footage there now. There's a significant amount of people there at this time now. There was a few hundred people there yesterday. Food has been brought there by a variety of businesses, some large businesses, some national businesses in the UK have even supplied food, water, soft drinks, hot food, you name it. And as you can see there, the gazebo is being set up. That's been donated. We've had generators donated. The amount of offer of support we've had from not just in the Llanelli area, but the wider area of South Wales has been absolutely astronomical. It is pleasing to see the way in which the community has come together. And as I said, there were several hundred people there yesterday supporting the hotel, the village, the community, and the concerns that we have regards the activity of the Home Office and its agents.
Yeah, no, indeed. And I think this is a fascinating case study on what actually happens when people have had enough. All too often, the Home Office has been plonking people in kind of 50-50 areas, OK? So areas where... Maidenhead's a good example, where, for example, it's Theresa May's constituency as an MP, the council there has just gone Lib Dem. So I would argue you've got a lot of kind of soft Tories there. So whilst you've got a lot of local opposition to the idea of a Holiday Inn being used as a migrant hotel, it's not really enough, and the people won't galvanise themselves quickly enough in the case that you guys have, in order to actually block something from happening. It'll be moved in, it'll be done, and then it's game over for that area if they don't want it to happen. You're not having them removed once they're in there, OK? Whereas you guys have all come together. And why is it so important to your community? Because I am assuming that you've probably got quite a bit of pushback from people outside the area saying, oh, look, come on, you're anti-asylum seeker, you must be racist or something.
We've had that. I think it's going to be par for the course, realistically. We're going to get those type of suggestions. But I said yesterday, that's not the case, because some of the people that are supporting us have been in mixed race marriages. They've got friends who are from different ethnic backgrounds, etc. It's about the way in which the Home Office has done it. There is a need to support vulnerable people. I said yesterday, you've got to be sensible here about it. And it was interesting to hear the words of your previous person being interviewed, Dr. Rafi. It was quite interesting in his views in relation to it, and pleasing to hear that. Now, as a community, we are concerned about what's going to be happening. Nobody's telling us what's happening. We don't know who's coming here. And one of the common things, when we're talking to people, they said if 250 adult males turned up in the area and they were staying there and they were going to be living there, the questions would be asked about them, irrespective of their background and their race, when you know nothing about them and nobody's engaging with you and helping you and giving advice and guidance. And obviously we're seeing things on social media. People are concerned by that. They're doing their own fact checks in relation to it. And it is, we're happy to support people. We are happy to support people, but this is totally the wrong place. As you can see some from the footage there now, those houses are occupied. The hotel itself overlooks a number of houses into their back gardens. They've got flimsy fencing there. As you walk around the village now, a number of properties have put their own wood fencing up at the front of the properties to stop people looking in. This isn't because of the crowds of people that are there. They've said there's concerns about what's going to happen in the future. The amount of Ring cameras, and then obviously there are other companies available, but the amount of Ring cameras that have been installed around the community is absolutely unbelievable. Llanelli itself is an old mining town, hard steel working area, factories, car factories, etc. There's not many of those jobs about these days. And as your colleague said about the working class area being targeted disproportionately, that is certainly the case here. It is a working class area who is trying to strive extremely hard to be able to bring in income through the travelling economy or tourism economy. And to take a 25% of the beds of the area away in a top-class hotel with the way that they've done it, with no suggestion of how there's going to be any improvement for the economy. There's obviously costs being incurred by a lot of different agencies. The police is obviously an expensive prospect for them. As I said, we're in for the long haul. Officers are there 24/7. They've been drafted from normal policing duties. They've been brought from home. Some of them, it is their own home, their own villages. Their family live close by. They're finding it extremely difficult to be policing this, and I appreciate there's some footage that's been on, but I know a number of the officers, and they are extremely upset by it.
It puts everybody. Yeah, it puts everybody in a very difficult situation, and I think you're absolutely right to highlight something, and this is vital, that this is as much an issue about, I would argue, working class rights as it is about anything else, actually. And working class areas being disproportionately targeted, like yours in Wales, like loads in the north of England, loads in the north of England. They're not dropping all of these people down in the leafy Surrey areas, are they? They are plonking them up north in places where they can call people all sorts of names if they don't want them and make people unemployed. Steve, thank you very much, and good luck. You'll be back at the picket line, as it were, at some point soon, I imagine. Steve Williams, their local resident, who's taking part in all of this. Look, here's a question. Here's a question for you. Is Gary Lineker worth £1.35 million a year? That is what he's being paid by the BBC. We'll have a look at the BBC rich list when we come back. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. OK, I'm going to get stuck right into this now on the BBC presenter scandal. The story, as we all know, broke last Friday. And while the accused man has been suspended, he has still not been named. One of the big questions now is, should the person be publicly named? I'm very pleased to say that we are now joined by Harvey Proctor, who in 2015 was wrongly accused of being a whole host of incredibly nasty things. Harvey, look, thank you very much. Now, I understand that you think it is, quotes, absurd that this individual should be named, which is something that I was asserting yesterday, and I completely get your view on that. But you do think that they should throw a press conference to out themselves, is that right?
Well, thank you for inviting me on. Yes, I respect you, but you were wrong yesterday when you suggested that a Member of Parliament should use parliamentary privilege to name this person. He definitely should not. It would be an abuse of parliamentary privilege if anyone did. I think that no one should name this person. If you remember, Tom Watson went and used parliamentary privilege in Parliament to disastrous consequences and started a moral panic which went everywhere. So what I do think is this, following from my own personal experience, I know that my experience is slightly different in that the allegations made against me were far worse than the ones that have been made against the BBC presenter. What I think he should consider doing is what I did, fed up with tittle-tattle, smears and stains and allegations being placed in the public arena by the Metropolitan Police, by the BBC, by the way, and other media, television and radio commentators. What he should consider doing is throw a press conference, as I did, and put all the facts in the public arena if he is innocent.
So, that's interesting, because you obviously had no problem doing that. Would you be surprised if he doesn't do that? Do you think that would maybe pose?
I am not going to put any pressure on him to do anything. It is a matter for him. What I do know is the pain and the aggravation and the horror that will be going through his mind and that of his family, and would not wish to add any pain to that. It is a matter for him, but if he was seeking my advice, then I would suggest he throws a press conference at the earliest opportunity.
And what happened when you threw a press conference? You managed to put your side of it out there and get ahead of the story, and did it make things infinitely better?
I'm not sure I got ahead of the story. Well, the story was well underway.
Yeah.
The Metropolitan Police had already said that my accuser was credible and true when he was incredible and untrue. And the media were taking every drip from the Metropolitan Police as gospel. After my press conference, there was a better balance, and the media did not believe the Metropolitan Police, and certainly didn't believe Carl Beach, my accuser. I think that he should consider that. He may think that he will never be identified. I think in terms of the media, he probably will be. Better for him to take the initiative, grasp the narrative. That will be my advice.
Well, look, Harvey, thank you. Thank you very much. It is always a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoy our conversations, and certainly when it comes to this particular topic as well, your insights as well. That's Harvey Proctor, there, the former Conservative Party MP. Now, it's a big day for the government's plans to tackle the migrant crisis. The illegal migration bill is being debated. 10,000 asylum seekers could be given exemption from being deported to Rwanda, and people are potentially being urged to take some of them into their own homes. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow, and again you will be dodging the downpour. Some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear there, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still one or two heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. Now, the mother of the young person at the centre of this BBC scandal has asked the question, who on earth is paying for their lawyers? I happen to think that's a fascinating question, and I'll be having a look at that at the top of the hour. In other news, we've done the idea that Brits are supposedly going to throw their doors open to asylum seekers. We've been to Wales to look at locals barricading a migrant hotel there. Now we're on to 10,000 Channel migrants apparently being given an amnesty to remain in this country. Is that another capitulation? But get a load of this, what's going on in your schools, OK? Apparently children are being taught things like critical race theory. They're being taught about racial differences. This is doing more, in my view, to divide us than bring us together, and I think it's indoctrination. We're also going to be discussing this one as well. The BBC Rich List is out. Apparently Gary Lineker's getting something like £1.3 million a year. Well, maybe, just maybe, that's value for money. What do you think? GBviews at gbnews.com. Patrick Christys on GB News. Let's go. Yes, well, lawyers certainly aren't cheap, are they? So I'll be having a look into all of that in relation to the BBC scandal. Do you think it's right that 10,000 Channel migrants should be given an amnesty in order to help get this illegal migration bill through? Is that a sign of yet another capitulation? GBviews at gbnews.com. But now it's your headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Patrick. The chairman of Ofcom says he doubts the allegations involving an unnamed BBC presenter will become a matter for the media regulator. Baron Michael Grade said the BBC's board must take full responsibility for the crisis. The BBC has paused its investigation while police look into possible criminal activity. A lawyer for the young man, who is now aged 20, says nothing unlawful happened. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. Salaries paid through the BBC's commercial arm or independent production companies do not have to be disclosed. Ukraine's president says it's absurd not to set a time frame for his country's NATO membership. World leaders are currently discussing the alliance at a summit in Lithuania. President Zelensky says the uncertainty provides motivation for Russia to continue its terror. General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg insists Ukraine will be given security guarantees.
I also expect that allies will send a clear and positive message on the path forward towards membership for Ukraine. I have proposed a package of 3 elements with more practical support with a multi-year program to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and the NATO forces. This will move Ukraine closer to NATO.
Joe Biden's former chief of staff, Susan Platt, told GB News the US will continue to back Ukraine in its war against Russia, but NATO membership won't happen until the conflict is over.
The U.S. has done everything they can in support of the war in Ukraine against Putin's army, and will continue to do that. I think there's time for everything, and I think it's great that we now have really a pretty much of a brick wall by including Finland and Sweden. Thank you to Mr. Erdogan joining in the NATO alliance against Russia.
A man's been found to have killed a 9-year-old girl as she played outside the shop where her mother was working. Lilia Valutite died from a single stab wound to the chest in Boston last July. 23-year-old Davidas Skibas was charged with her murder, but deemed unfit to stand trial due to his mental health. He's expected to be given a hospital order, the only possible sentence. MPs are considering amendments to the illegal migration bill as the government attempts to get it through the House of Commons. Changes include limiting the detention periods of unaccompanied children and pregnant women. And the legislation will no longer be used retrospectively against people already here in the UK. Well, Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick told MPs he disagrees with many of the changes proposed, describing them as a wrecking ball. The draft legislation suffered a record 20 defeats in the House of Lords. Mortgage rates have hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.66%, the highest level seen since the financial crisis of 2008. The Bank of England raised its benchmark rate to 5% last month in an effort to bring down inflation. However, the pace of wage growth has risen again, prompting fears of a further hike in interest rates next month. Average weekly pay is 7.3% higher in the 3 months to May compared with last year, matching the joint highest figures since records began back in 2001. The Office for National Statistics also revealed unemployment rose unexpectedly over the quarter to 4%. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled that the two-time Olympic champion caster Semenya has been discriminated against by World Athletics. The 800-metre runner has a condition which means she produces higher levels of testosterone. She was banned from competing after refusing to take drugs to lower her testosterone levels. The court ruled that this violated her human rights and she was not given sufficient safeguards when she complained. Train fares could be reduced under a plan to encourage more competition on Britain's railways. New research says allowing multiple operators to run services on the same line leads to better services, newer trains and cheaper fares. Rail Partners, which represents private train companies, is calling for open access to allow more companies to compete for customers like in many other European countries. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Patrick.
We're going straight in with some big breaking news on the BBC presenter alleged to have paid a young person for sexually explicit photographs. I'm going to go straight to our reporter, Mark White, who's outside New Broadcasting House. Mark, I understand that there are some new claims that have just emerged. What is it?
Yes, BBC News now reporting that a second young person has come forward and made allegations against the same presenter at the centre of these allegations. It's been reported that this person in their early 20s had been contacted anonymously by the presenter over a dating app. Now, this young person has told BBC News that they then came under pressure to meet up with this individual. They said that when the young person hinted online that they might name the presenter, they were then sent abusive and expletive-filled messages. Now, we should add, according to BBC News, that this person is not connected to the person that made those allegations, or didn't make the allegations, but whose family members made allegations on the 18th of May about this presenter and the sending of explicit images and the payment, allegedly, of money to this individual. We should also add that this person at the centre of the initial allegations denies those allegations made by a family member, describing them as rubbish. But this second allegation now is clearly very significant. It explains perhaps why earlier today on The World at One on BBC Radio 4, when the Director General, Tim Davie, was being interviewed, he was asked specifically if he knew of any other allegations that had been made against this high-profile BBC presenter. Tim Davie avoided that question effectively by saying that it would be inappropriate to comment, given that there is a Metropolitan Police scoping exercise underway to determine whether there should be a formal criminal investigation launched into those allegations, those initial allegations.
No, indeed, and this is just breaking now. I'm just going to read a couple of. I'm just going to read. If we come back to me, I'm just going to read a couple of points here from this report, which has just landed now. After the two had first connected on the dating app, the conversation moved to other platforms. At this stage, the presenter revealed his identity and told the young person not to tell anyone. This is according to the BBC's report, OK? Later, the young person alluded online to having contact with a BBC presenter and implied that they would name him at some point. The presenter reacted by sending a number of threatening messages, which BBC News has seen. BBC News has been able to verify that the messages were sent from a phone number belonging to the presenter. The BBC has also come out and said that the new allegations of menacing and bullying behaviour by the high-profile presenter raise fresh questions about his conduct, and BBC News has contacted the presenter directly and via his lawyer, but has received no response to the latest allegations. I'm just going to bring Mark White back in now. Mark, our reporter who's outside New Broadcasting House for us. Mark, thank you very much. Yes, so essentially, yes, the BBC is saying this raises fresh questions about this individual's conduct. And, though, the point of difference here, arguably, between the initial allegations and these ones is the speed with which the BBC have reacted to this. They have come out straight away and said BBC News has contacted the presenter directly and via his lawyer, but has as yet received no response to the latest allegations. And frankly, this story is not going away, is it?
Yeah, I think we need to make the distinction here, though. This is BBC News independently investigating the story just as we are, and BBC corporate. We have heard nothing from BBC management with regard to this. BBC management who are now coming under some serious questioning with regard to the slow pace, it seems, of that initial investigation into the allegations that were made, first of all, on the 18th of May, that resulted in, first of all, an email being sent that got no reply, and then 2.5 weeks passing before a phone call was made that didn't connect, and then no further phone calls were made until the Sun contacted the BBC with the news that they were going to splash the allegations the next again day. Only at that point did BBC management speak to this presenter. So clearly some very serious questions for BBC management to answer on this, and they have not, certainly according to that article, just reading it like you, Patrick, made any comment thus far. But the BBC News, independent of the management structure here, have reached out to the presenter directly, asking for comment through either him or through the lawyers, and has received nothing back at this stage. But a significant and a serious development and allegation that's being made, and it may well be that also is included in this scoping exercise that the Metropolitan Police is carrying out, because specifically this young person making this allegation talks about being quite fearful now in response to the communications that this person received, and the fact that those communications were abusive and expletive laden. There may well, in that sense then, be an offence that has taken place. Something, of course, for the police to consider in this scoping exercise that they're carrying out. But I think clearly a very significant development in this case, with BBC News independent of the corporate structure here, investigating the story like everyone else, speaking to another young individual who has come forward and made completely separate allegations to those made on the 18th of May.
Let's just take a little bit of a step back, again, just in terms of the previous allegations that had been doing the rounds now for the last few days, Mark. Tim Davie, the BBC Director General, gave an interview earlier on, and he confirmed, as I believe the police have confirmed, Scotland Yard have confirmed, that they've asked the BBC to stop their internal investigation into that first raft of allegations whilst the police do a scoping exercise. So just recap that for us, if that's OK.
Yes, so that is where they are at the moment in terms of being able to continue with the internal investigation into the allegations that were received. It doesn't stop them, of course, looking into their own internal structures about what they did more generally in dealing with complaints, and saying that clearly, as far as flagging up, allegations that are serious in nature further up the chain, perhaps there are lessons to be learned, a bit of an understatement maybe, that they need to then address. It's worth, I think, just briefly going through, if we can, Patrick, that timeline from the initial complaint that was made on the 18th of May. The complainant, a family member of the person at the centre of the allegations, turned up, we're told, at a BBC building where they made a complaint about the behaviour of a BBC presenter. Now, on the 19th of May, the complainant contacted BBC Audience Services, again reiterating that complaint, and it was passed on to corporate investigative services. The investigations team carried out their own initial assessment. They assessed that complaint was serious, but they also maintained that there was no allegation of criminality. But they then emailed the complainant, did not get a reply to their email, but then after that waited another 2.5 weeks, and takes us forward now to the 6th of June. On the 6th of June, they telephoned the complainant. That call didn't connect, and then they made no effort, it seems, to contact either by email or telephone call to the complainant until the Sun contacted them on the 19th. Or I should say on the 6th of July, just the day before these allegations were splashed across the Sun last Friday. And it was at that point that they then spoke to the presenter at the centre of the allegations.
Mark, thank you very, very much. That's Mark White there. He's outside New Broadcasting House for us. Any updates, and, excuse me, it's reasonable to expect that there may well be some very shortly. We will go back to Mark White. If you are just joining us, I'm just going to recap that breaking line that emerged moments ago, OK? A young person has told BBC News they felt threatened by the BBC presenter. So this is a second young person who is coming forward with allegations about an as-yet unnamed BBC presenter. They said that they felt threatened by the BBC presenter. The individual is in their early 20s. They were first contacted anonymously by the presenter on a dating app. This is all according to BBC reports. They say they were put under pressure to meet up, but never did. When the young person hinted online that they might name the presenter, they were sent abusive, expletive-filled messages. The young person, who has spoken to BBC News, and it's important to say, has no connection, they are saying, to the person who's at the centre of the Sun stories that have been dropping in recent days. They said that they had been scared by the power that the presenter had. They said that the threats made in the messages had frightened them, and they remain scared. The new allegations of, and I'm quoting now, menacing and bullying behaviour by the high-profile presenter raise fresh questions about his conduct. Apparently, the BBC presenter in question has been contacted both directly and via his lawyers, who, at this moment in time, are not understood, either of them, to have responded to those claims. What is interesting is that the BBC is saying that they have seen the messages, which are described as threatening, and that they have been able to verify that the messages were sent from a phone number belonging to the presenter, and that the young person's initial online posts has also been seen by BBC News. And so that is the latest. Mark White, our Home Security Editor, who has been outside New Broadcasting House for us, did say that Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, who was giving an interview earlier on, was asked whether or not any other allegations have been put against the unnamed BBC presenter, and he kind of dodged that question And here we are now. So that is the new line, which is that the BBC presenter sent abusive and menacing messages to a second young person. We'll have lots more on this story very, very shortly. We'll get more for you right now, actually, on our website, gbnews.com. It is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got the best analysis, big opinion, and all of the latest breaking news as well. Look, just as a little aside, we are, of course, still campaigning to stop the UK becoming a cashless society. The campaign is called Don't Kill Cash. Very, very popular. We've got more than 205,000 of you signing that petition now. Great stuff. The petition's on our website. It's gbnews.com/cash. If you've got a smartphone, use it. Click that QR code that you will see on your screens right now. If you're watching us on telly or online, help GB News with our campaign to tell those authorities to don't kill cash. Look, in the next few moments, I will ask whether the government is right to change the illegal migration bill. What they want to do, apparently, is give 10,000 Channel migrants protection from being sent to Rwanda. Is that OK? Should that happen? Is that a massive cop-out? And, of course, I will have much more for you on that breaking line. The BBC presenter in question sent abusive and menacing messages to a second young person. That's the very latest, but more after your weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow and again. You will be dodging the downpour, some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still one or two heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, the government is apparently thinking about giving a total amnesty to 10,000 Channel migrants to make sure they don't go to Rwanda in a bid to get this illegal migration bill, unlike some flights to Rwanda, it would seem, off the ground. I'll be talking about all of that. I'll also be returning to the idea about whether or not you would take an asylum seeker into your own home, and we will be having a lot more on that breaking news that the BBC presenter sent abusive and menacing messages as a second young person comes forward. And I will be talking to a lawyer on whether or not, or indeed how, somebody might be paying for an individual's legal fees. More on this very shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. A reminder of this hour's big breaking news. The BBC presenter alleged to have paid a young person for sexually explicit photos is now facing a claim from a second young person. The BBC is reporting that the presenter sent what have been called a number of threatening messages. It says that the young person felt threatened by the messages and, quotes, remains scared. I will be discussing that shortly. I will also be talking to a legal expert who is going to hopefully answer some questions that the mother of one of the young people involved in all of this floated in the press yesterday, which is how are the legal fees being paid? And I think that is a fascinating question, which hopefully we will be able to get some idea of as this story rumbles on. But there is another story in town, which I'm going to go to before we continue with that. The illegal migration bill is being debated in the Commons today. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you will be sick and tired of hearing this, but there is an important concession, which I think will get a lot of you quite wound up. It's the centrepiece of the government's plans to tackle the migrant crisis, as we all know. More than 13,000 migrants have now crossed the Channel so far this year, including 1,600 in the last 4 days alone. But the government has made a number of changes to the bill because our MPs and our Lords are frankly doing us all a great national disservice and not sorting this out for us. Now, they want to include, supposedly, an amnesty for more than 10,000 migrants who arrived before it becomes law. I am joined by the UK immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Harjap, thank you very, very much. Your reaction to a 10,000-person Channel migrant amnesty as a way of trying to get this through the Commons and the Lords?
Yeah, effectively, as part of this legislation, what it was to be anybody who's come after March 2023. And since then, 10,000 people have come. So effectively, they could have been sent back to Rwanda. But the new amendment that said, well, this won't take place. It'll be anybody coming after the law has passed. I mean, disregarding all of that, there's only 500 places in Rwanda anyway. So sending 10,000 people to a place where there's only 500, it's a bit like saying I want to, fit the size of a football ground into a 2-bedroom flat, and that's just not going to happen. So to send 10,000 people to Rwanda under the current capacity would take 22 years. So I think this was a bit of a smokescreen and a non-starter, really. But it's just something to show that they're conceding. Rishi Sunak wants to get this through. You know, it's one of the pledges that he's made. Suella Braverman wants to get this through. The Lords are not having it in its current form. So they're going back and forth, offering some concessions. And Rishi Sunak hopes to get this through finally.
Yeah, and indeed could actually, I would imagine, lead to a surge. Because if they're saying that this won't actually come into force, if there's an amnesty that won't end until the point where this actually becomes law, I mean, if anyone in Calais at the moment or Dunkirk even cares about the possibility of being sent to Rwanda, which I am becoming increasingly sceptical about whether or not they do, then they're going to be desperate to get on the next possible boat, aren't they, to be part of an amnesty?
I think regardless of Rwanda policy or not, we saw this weekend there were a record number of crossings this weekend. So I don't think the Rwanda policy is acting as much as a deterrent as maybe the government thinks it is. I don't think it's acting as a deterrent at all. And, and if something acts as a deterrent, you expect to see numbers go down, not go up. So I think the government has to rethink its strategy. The fear of Rwanda is not stopping the migrants. It's definitely not stopping the people smugglers. They don't care whether you send people to Rwanda, to the USA, or Timbuktu. They're not really worried about that. They're getting paid either way. So the government really have to rethink their strategy. And more importantly, they've got to stop making promises which they can't keep. Because every time they bring out a bit of legislation, they raise the hopes of the British public that perhaps they're doing something. And we know it's just not going to happen.
Well, this is the thing, though. And actually, I am becoming increasingly annoyed, which I wasn't sure was possible, given how enraged I normally am about this kind of story anyway. But I'm becoming increasingly annoyed by... This is now a political problem, right? This is now overtly a problem between the 650-odd MPs that we've got and however many people are in the House of Lords that is affecting every single Joe Bloggs out there on the street. And because they can't sort this, we are all, in one way or another, suffering. And it winds me right up that there is this... And then now there's, OK, right, well, there's going to be this concession, supposedly. And I know that this is just a kind of paper concession, really, because we weren't going to send 10,000 people to Rwanda anyway. But then you make a little... You move a little inch on that, and then what's the other concession that goes forward? And then when does all of this come in? And you know, there was a report out earlier on that was basically talking about whether or not, you know, people in your leafy suburbs with a mansion and a load of rooms should be making way to open their own doors for asylum seekers. I mean, it'd be nice if they did that and maybe tried to take the burden off the taxpayer. But it shouldn't have come to that. And it is now just genuinely a problem that is taking place in Westminster because these numpties can't get their heads together and get it sorted. And it's affecting the nation. But anyway, Harjap, I've invited you on just to rant at you, I'm afraid, my good man, because we are out of time. But Harjap, thank you.
That's all right.
He's used to me by now. Harjap, thank you, mate. Take care. Harjap Singh Bangal, UK immigration lawyer, just reacting to that 10,000 migrant amnesty, apparently, that's taking place. Look, we will have more very shortly. Just a quick recap. This huge breaking news regarding the unnamed BBC presenter. A second individual has come forward, and BBC News has seen a number of what they are calling threatening messages, and they have contacted the unnamed BBC presenter in question. They are yet to hear anything, but it is now second allegations coming forward against this presenter. How long can this person remain unnamed? I have got a legal expert on in just a tick when I come back to talk about that and who is maybe paying the legal fees of the first young person who came forward. But right now, it's your headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Well, as you've been hearing, breaking news this hour, a second person has come forward to make a complaint against the BBC presenter accused of paying for sexually explicit photos. The broadcaster says it spoke to a person in their early 20s who said they were sent a number of threatening messages. It comes after they were first contacted anonymously by the presenter on a dating app. The person was allegedly put under pressure to meet the BBC star, but never did. Speaking to BBC News, the second young person, who's not involved in the previous payments for photos allegation, said they remain scared by the power the presenter holds. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. Salaries paid through the BBC's commercial arm or through independent production companies do not have to be disclosed. Ukraine's president says it's absurd not to set a time frame for his country's NATO membership. World leaders are currently discussing the alliance at a summit in Lithuania. President Zelensky says the uncertainty provides motivation for Russia to continue its terror. A man has been found to have killed a 9-year-old girl as she played outside the shop where her mother was working. Lilia Valutite died from a single stab wound to the chest in Boston last July. 23-year-old Davidas Skibas was charged with her murder but deemed unfit to stand trial due to his mental health. He's expected to be given a hospital order, the only possible sentence. That's you up to date, but you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website. That is gbnews.com. Now, though, back to Patrick.
Right, more now on the BBC presenter alleged to have paid a young person for sexually explicit photos, who is now facing a claim from a second young person. The BBC is reporting that the presenter sent what have been called a number of threatening messages. It says the young person felt threatened and still remains scared. So this is the latest development in a story that broke last Friday. Now, an initial complaint was made to the BBC by a member of the young person's family on May the 18th. A day later, a corporate investigations team assessed that complaint. It assessed that the information did not include an allegation of criminality, but that it was serious. The team emailed the complainant but got no response. This is what they claim. 2.5 weeks later, BBC investigators say that they rang the complainant but that the call didn't connect. Then, last Thursday, BBC investigators finally spoke to the presenter following allegations in The Sun. OK? So that prompted, obviously, this story to come out. It prompted a lot of calls for the individual to either be named or to name themselves. The breaking news, as of around half an hour ago, is that a second young person has come forward. The BBC has seen what it is calling threatening messages, and they have been able to verify that they come from the number from the presenter. And these are the claims. Of course, this is now, you know, a drip, 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 isn't it, really? And I suppose the question will be, what next? I am joined now by the media lawyer, Jonathan Coe. Jonathan, thank you very much. Great to have you on. So I initially wanted you on to talk about the claims by the mother of the first young person who was asking the question, who could be paying their legal fees? And I will start with that, if that's OK. How could this be working? Because I would imagine lawyers, reputable lawyers, certainly don't come cheap. Your thoughts?
It's a very good question. And I've looked up, the Times has named the law firm and I've looked them up, and they generally seem to be not media lawyers, but lawyers who are concerned with the care of the individual. The only thing I would say is that it may be a bit of a shocker, Patrick, but there are lawyers out there who have a conscience. I mean, I'm a devout Christian. I've always done pro bono work. I've done a lot of work for people caught up in the public eye who can't afford to pay me, because they, you know, the power of the media to wreck people's lives is very real. I mean, one of my clients is Caroline Flack, so I know from my own practice how serious these issues can be. So it may just be that a lawyer with a conscience is just doing his best and isn't necessarily being paid. So the question may not arise.
Yes, no, that is interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that I had you on, actually, because I think it will have been deemed beyond the realms of possibility to a lot of people that a law firm as reputable as the one who's been named in the Times would do anything for free. And you think there's a chance that they might be?
So there's an old gag that goes, what's the difference between a cheap lawyer and a tooth fairy? Answer, there's no such thing as a cheap lawyer. But actually, there is a small army of lawyers out there who give their time pro bono. They're solicitors and barristers. So it is perfectly possible that this is someone who recognises that, I mean, because this is a very important point, that their client is caught up in a slightly undignified battle between a Murdoch newspaper and the BBC. And the risk is that this person becomes collateral damage in this battle. So that they may have just thought, well, someone needs to help and I'm prepared to do it.
There are, Jonathan, as I understand it anyway, no rules are there about anyone paying for somebody else's legal fees, though. So somebody with enough money to do so and some kind of interest in a story could potentially be paying legal fees.
That is absolutely right. There is nothing to stop person A paying the legal fees of person B. Now, they can either do it for legitimate charitable reasons, and straight enough, such things do happen, or they can do it for reasons to protect themselves. So you're quite right. There are three possibilities. This individual, for some reason, is able to fund their own legal fees, or possibly a member of their family is doing so. Secondly, the lawyer's doing it pro bono, free of charge. The third possibility is that someone, either for fair reasons or foul, is paying the bills.
OK, right. Now, let's just shift things on briefly, if that's OK, Jonathan, because I would quite like to pick your brains about this latest breaking line, actually, which is, I'll just read out what I've got here. It's on the BBC website. BBC presenters sent abusive and menacing messages to a second young person. The BBC is claiming that they've seen these messages. The individual involved feels frightened, still remains scared to this day. This is a killer line for me here. BBC News, which is important an important distinction between the BBC corporate and BBC News, to make that very clear. BBC News has contacted the presenter directly and via his lawyer, but has received no response to latest allegations. Well, they're contacting somebody who works for them, right? And they have not received any response yet. If you were the lawyer for the individual in question, what would you be saying? Because this does have a drip, drip, drip feel about it now, doesn't it?
If I was representing the individual in question, I'd be probably drinking a lot of brandy and trying to think of a way of going abroad for a long period. I mean, it must be every kind of nightmare. And it is also a situation I've been in. I mean, not quite as bad as this, but I've certainly represented high-profile individuals in this kind of storm. It's very difficult to say what they might be saying because it depends an awful lot on what they know, or also what they're being told. I mean, I'm Philip Schofield's lawyer, and it is very much in the public domain that I made a denial to the Mail on Sunday of a story concerning Philip, which turned out to be an untrue denial. Now, all of us who are conscientious lawyers are very keen not to send out letters or emails or whatever with information that isn't true. So I imagine that this lawyer is doing his best or her best to try and find out really what's going on. But the other point is that from the lawyer's perspective, you may or may not be getting a response from the client. We don't know whether the client's responding to telephone calls, emails, or anything. So it's difficult to put yourself in the shoes of the lawyer without knowing more detail about what the situation is.
I just want one final one with you while I've got you, Jonathan, if that's all right, because people in my position occasionally end up talking to people like you before we come on air. And there's a big question mark, which I think rears its head again now, about right to privacy versus public interest. Does a second allegation shift anything for you? And this, of course, centres around whether or not the individual in question should be named.
Well, no, it doesn't, because the same principles apply. The basic rule is that until allegations are proven, rightly or wrongly, the law says that an individual's sort of ambit of privacy allows them not to be the public subject of allegations unless and until there is a police investigation and there's an arrest and a charge. Now, the BBC's position is slightly different, perhaps, because if they have seen these exchanges, then I think they're in a different position from the earlier one, where I don't think they've seen all the evidence. They now actually have the evidence and they've seen it. I suspect they are going to have meetings with their lawyers on the basis of, well, now we have this information. Do we now have to say who this individual is?
Jonathan, I really appreciate this. Thank you very much. It's been fascinating. I know that our viewers and our listeners will have appreciated that as well. As Jonathan Code there, who is a media lawyer. Look, I'm going to go now to Mark White, who is outside New Broadcasting House for us. Look, Mark, thank you very much for coming back on. Yes, OK, so the latest, please. There was a bit of breaking news earlier on, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the face of it, the new allegations as reported by BBC News seem to be pretty significant in this overall story. A young person in their early 20s reporting that they have, or alleging that they had met the presenter through a dating app, that dating app conversation moved on to other platforms. At some stage, the presenter, according to this young person, had then revealed their true identity. Later on, after declining an invitation to meet this presenter, that young person, according to BBC News, had posted on an online platform alluding to the fact that they had been in conversation and met, at least online, with a prominent BBC presenter, and that they might name this person. It was at that point, according to BBC News, that according to this young person, the presenter was sending abusive and threatening messages. Now, here is a key point in what the BBC are reporting, I think. They said that they have seen those messages. And BBC News, they claim, has been able to verify that the messages were sent from a phone number belonging to the presenter. They've also seen that young person's online post. So given that, and you've got to take, of course, BBC News's reporting at face value, you would expect them to have done due diligence and to, have absolutely made sure that they have checked out the story as best they can before putting these new explosive allegations out there. This is clearly a very significant development.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, our reporter who's at the scene at New Broadcasting House. Look, more on this as we get it. Second allegation's gone in now. Does it make it even more untenable that the identity of the individual embroiled in all of this can remain hidden? Will that change the state of play? Loads more on this very, very shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's News Channel. Yeah, just a reminder, of course, of our top story there, which is that a second young person has now made allegations about as yet unnamed BBC presenter. These involve abusive and menacing messages. But look, we do have time to squeeze in one more story for you. The BBC has released its annual report, which reveals how much its biggest stars are paid. Gary Lineker has topped the list for a 6th year in a row, earning $1.35 million in the last financial year. GB News' South East of England reporter Ray Addison can talk us through it now. Ray, yes, we have finally got to you. Sorry, Bungo Man. What's going on?
Well, I mean, it's down. It's down from the previous year, not by much, 100 grand down, down from 5.7 million to 5.6 for the top 10 paid. And, of course, in there at number 1, it's his 6th year in a row. Gary Lineker, Match of the Day presenter, and he's on £1.35 million a year, a cool 1.35. He did actually take a voluntary pay cut in 2020. He was originally on 1.75 million a year.
Cost of living crisis.
Exactly. We've all got to make cuts. Zoe Ball's just below him. She's on 985,000. Of course, the Radio 1, rather Radio 2 breakfast show now, showing my age there. And I've been working out how many licence fees need to be sort of sold to pay for some of these salaries. Of course, for Gary, it's around 8,500. Wow. For Zoe, we're all the way down to 6,194. So
rather a lot, of course. And Alan Shearer, I can see on there as well, quickly.
Yeah, he's in the 3rd slot. He's actually taken a 5 grand pay cut from last year. He's on £450,000 a year. Of course, Mr Lineker's pundit on Match of the Day, 2,830 licence fee payers required, £159 a pop. And, of course, you know, we've been hearing from Tim Davie, the Director General. He is actually on £528,000. Oh, wow. So if he was in the top 10, if he was being paid as a presenter, he'd be in 3rd place.
He'd be in 3rd place.
3rd place, not bad.
Not bad, not bad. The bronze medal. Look, Ray, thank you very, very much. It's Ray Addison. They're whizzing you through the BBC rich list. Right, OK, fast-paced show, as I'm sure you're all aware. This hour's breaking news. The BBC presenter alleged to have paid a young person for sexually explicit photos is now facing a 2nd claim. How much longer can that individual go unnamed? And what's around the corner? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow and again. You will be dodging the downpour, some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still 1 or 2 heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and it looks as though it's drip, drip, drip at the BBC. Yes, OK. So there is a breaking news line about the as-yet unnamed BBC presenter who is now facing allegations from a second young person, this time over abusive and threatening messages. The BBC has said that they have seen those messages, have contacted the unnamed presenter, and are yet to hear anything back. More on this, but crucially, how much longer can their identity be kept a secret? In other news, would you open your doors to an asylum seeker? A new policy is urging the wealthy and the elite in the leafy parts of Britain to house asylum seekers in their own home. Do you think they'll do it? I don't. And as well, the Welsh are fighting back. There is an ongoing blockade. They're setting up camp, quite literally, the local residents, that is, outside a site that's proposed for use as a migrant hotel. This is a local community fighting back. We will be going there live very shortly, and we're also going to be discussing this as well. Yes, that's right. The Satanist capital of Britain has been revealed. It's a sleepy, small village. You wouldn't have thought it. It's like something out of Hot Fuzz. We'll be talking about that. Patrick Christys, GB News. Yeah, in just a second, I'm going to take you to New Broadcasting House. Fresh allegations made against the same as-yet unnamed BBC presenter. How much longer can this really go on for? But right now, it's your headlines.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. A second person has come forward to make a complaint against the BBC presenter accused of paying for sexually explicit photos. The broadcaster says it spoke to a person in their early 20s who claims they were sent a number of threatening messages. It's after they were allegedly contacted by the presenter on a dating app before moving to other platforms. The person says they were put under pressure to meet the BBC star, but never did. Speaking to the BBC, the second young person, who was not involved in the previous payments for photos allegation, said they remained scared by the power the presenter holds. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. Salaries paid through the BBC's commercial arm or through the independent production companies don't have to be disclosed. The NATO chief has announced allies have agreed to 3 steps to bring Ukraine closer to membership. Jens Stoltenberg says 11 nations will start training Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 jets. They've also removed the requirement for a membership action plan, making Ukraine's path to becoming a NATO country easier. Well, in addition to this, they will create a Ukraine-NATO Council for consultation and decision-making, with the first meeting tomorrow. Well, Joe Biden's former Chief of Staff, Susan Platt, told GB News the US will continue to back Ukraine in its war against Russia, but NATO membership will not happen until the conflict is over.
The U.S. has done everything they can in support of the war in Ukraine against Putin's army, and will continue to do that. I think there's time for everything, and I think it's great that we now have really a pretty much of a brick wall by including Finland and Sweden. Thank you to Mr. Erdogan joining the NATO alliance against Russia.
A man's been found to have killed a 9-year-old girl as she played outside the shop where her mother was working. Lilia Valutite died from a single stab wound to the chest in Boston last July. 23-year-old Davida Skibas was charged with her murder, but deemed unfit to stand trial due to his mental health. He's expected to be given a hospital order, the only possible sentence. MPs are considering amendments to the illegal migration bill as the government attempts to get it through the House of Commons. Changes include limiting the detention periods of unaccompanied children and pregnant women. And the legislation will no longer be used retrospectively against people already here in the UK. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick told MPs he disagrees with many of the changes proposed, describing them as a wrecking ball. The draft legislation suffered a record 20 defeats in the House of Lords. Mortgage rates have hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.66%, the highest level seen since the financial crisis of 2008. The Bank of England raised its benchmark rate to 5% last month in an effort to bring down inflation. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled that the 2-time Olympic champion Caster Semenya was discriminated against by World Athletics. The 800-metre runner has a condition which means she produces higher levels of testosterone. She was banned from competing after refusing to take drugs to lower her testosterone levels. Well, the court ruled that this violated her human rights and she was not given sufficient safeguards when she complained. Train fares could be reduced under a plan to encourage more competition in Britain's railways. New research says allowing multiple operators to run services on the same line leads to better services, newer trains and cheaper fares. Rail Partners, which represents private train companies, is calling for open access to allow more companies to compete for customers, like in many other European countries. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Patrick.
Well, the BBC presenter at the centre of claims of inappropriate conduct is now facing a second set of allegations from a different young person. According to BBC News, the person is now in their early 20s and was subject of threatening and abusive messages after initially making contact on a dating app. This unquestionably moves the story forward, definitely raises serious questions now about whether or not this individual can continue to remain unnamed, whether or not the question of an MP using parliamentary privilege actually becomes more valid, and what indeed happens next, and whether or not, as well, this is a moment where other people come forward. Let's go now to Mark White, who's outside New Broadcasting House for us with the very latest. Mark, yes, this breaking news, go on.
Patrick, there's no doubt these are explosive new allegations that are being reported by BBC News at this hour. The first thing that I think we should stress is that they are completely separate to the previous allegations. It is a different person at the centre of these allegations, but they relate to a person who is in their early 20s, a person that said they met this BBC presenter on a dating app, that they came under pressure to meet this presenter but never did, that the conversations and interaction moved on to other platforms, and that at some point this person posting online threatened to out this presenter, to allude to the fact that they were speaking to a prominent BBC presenter and that they might well expose this person online. Then the allegations go, according to BBC News, that this person says they were contacted by multiple messages from this BBC presenter that can be described as abusive, threatening, expletive-laden. And the BBC News, and I think this is a key line out of what they're reporting, they say that they have independently verified that the number that was used to send those messages to this person making the allegations was from the number associated with this BBC presenter.
No, indeed, yes, absolutely. That's the very latest as we understand it. Look, Mark, thank you very, very much. It's Mark White there, Home Security Editor, who is outside New Broadcasting House. We'll be going back to Mark for any updates. This story was broken, or the story, I should say, not this specific one, but the story was broken by The Sun last Friday. Now, today's paper quotes the mother of a young person who was involved in the initial allegation against the unnamed BBC presenter. And this is the quote that really got me. It said, how did they afford a lawyer? Since then, the story has moved on because we now have a second allegation. I'm joined now by the media lawyer Ian Bloom. Ian, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the show. Can I transport you for a second into the office of the unnamed BBC presenter and just ask, in light of a second allegation coming forward and in light of the fact that the BBC News have said that they have contacted the presenter and his lawyer and are yet to hear anything in response, what advice would you be giving that BBC star now?
The first thing to say, good afternoon, Patrick. The first thing to say is that he's clearly not my client, but I wouldn't presume to give anyone advice until I'd spoken to them at length and obtained a detailed statement to understand exactly what had happened. And I don't know what has happened. None of us know what has happened. So the starting point is, what did happen? The second point is, what do you want to achieve? At the moment, the thunderclouds are rolling around your head. Do you want to voluntarily speak and out yourself? Do you need medical advice? What is it that you want to achieve? You can't magic this away. This is developing into a major issue for yourself, for the BBC, and for your fellow presenters, some of whom have had to come out and say, it wasn't me. So it's a difficult thing to say, how would I advise a hypothetical client, because I don't know the facts.
No, absolutely. I do think you...
I need to know them. I want to know them. And then you can make a reasoned judgment as to what's best.
No, indeed. And like you said there, that relationship will have to be based on one of honesty if, indeed, you are going to manage to go forward. It does have a feel, Ian, and no doubt you will have been involved in a variety of different situations over the course of your esteemed career. It does have the feel of something that is quite possibly going to rumble on. You use the phrase thunderclouds gathering overhead, doesn't it?
It does. It does. At the moment, there is no evidence that's been put into the public domain, either by The Sun, which should have had it before it published, or the family of the young person, or the young person himself, or his lawyer, that we can see that any kind of crime has actually been committed. We don't know that. At the moment, there are these allegations. And because they are still only allegations, the presumption of innocence applies, and this presenter still is entitled to a reasonable privacy. He can't be named. He ought not to be named. And the problem is the pile-on on social media is almost desperate for him to be named. And as you know, as GBNews will know, as other news organisations know, his name is becoming more widely known in media circles.
Yeah. No, indeed. And it is a point that I was making yesterday, and this was before we had then the lawyer for the initial young person coming out and saying this is rubbish. Then we had a hit back from the mother and stepfather, and now we've got this. So yesterday at 3 p.m, I was saying, look, I do think that there is maybe a case for this individual to come out and either be named or name themselves, primarily because loads of other people are getting roped into this. And it's the talk of pubs up and down the country, it's the talk of family dining tables around the country, everything. And that can actually be incredibly, incredibly dangerous. Look, at what point does that right to privacy versus public interest, especially considering we are dealing with a publicly funded broadcaster and an individual who is essentially, in a roundabout way, paid by the taxpayer to provide a public service, at what point is the privacy versus public interest balance tipped in terms of naming, do you think?
It's the key question, I think, and you're right to ask me. To my mind, it tips when the presenter is arrested and charged with an offence. Until then, like it or not, the law's clear. The entitlement to privacy should hold. You can't control, it seems to me, what's put out on social media. Sadly, you can't even control some publicity-hungry MPs who might decide to use the absolute privilege they have in Parliament to let the name slip. They did that in the Ryan Giggs case a few years ago.
Yeah.
To defy a super injunction. I regarded that as an abuse of parliamentary privilege, and so did a lot of other lawyers. That shouldn't be happening, because ultimately, innocent reputations of those who are innocent can be destroyed by false accusations, and we don't yet know, however much we want to, we don't yet know how much credibility these accusations, these allegations have got. They've been made, they've been denied by the first young person. The second one claims to have been, as far as we know, and this is breaking news for all of us, claims to have felt intimidated or threatened by messages. We haven't seen the messages. There was no contact. There were no payments. There were no photographs, and so on. So it's preemptive to talk about this presenter must now be named. Let the due process take its place. Let the police and or the BBC investigate quickly and thoroughly, and then and only then can there be some clarity.
The BBC, what kind of duty of care do you think the BBC itself has to the public and to its other staff? Because two things here. If a presenter has, as the allegation in this case would appear, by definition of who they are, been in a position of power and celebrity, and therefore that the power dynamic in these allegations has made the individual, as they claim, feel threatened, okay, and scared. That is a BBC employee who is allegedly having done that. Also, of course, this idea now that other BBC presenters are essentially being roped in, and the turmoil and, frankly, the ongoing nightmare and reputational damage for anyone who works at the BBC at the moment, really. At what point does the law start to come down where the BBC have got to be putting the priorities of those people before the priorities of this unnamed presenter? Is that a very grey area? I've probably worded that very badly. I hope you understand what I mean there.
Well, it is. The BBC does have a duty of care to its employees, those who are directly affected by this, those who are at the sharp end, starting with the presenter in question, but also the other high-profile presenters as well. But it's got to balance that duty with its legal obligation not to invade the privacy to which I've said he is still entitled.
Okay.
At some point, he may decide to go public with a prepared statement. But if he doesn't, and it is his choice, if he doesn't, the BBC isn't entitled at the moment to disclose his name. It may be limited in what it can do for the other presenters. It's a terribly unfortunate position that they find themselves in. And if even more want to come out and say, it wasn't me, then that will reduce the pool of potential presenters who are the one in question.
Yes.
And that itself add pressure to the actual presenter to say, OK, I have to say something now. It doesn't have a duty of care to the public as such. That's too nebulous, it's too remote, it's too contingent. It has an obligation to be as balanced, as truthful, and all the rest of it, that as the major public service broadcaster in this country you'd expect.
Okay.
But it doesn't have a duty of care as such, as we know it, as we define it, that it would have to its own individual employees.
Ian, thank you very much. Really fascinating stuff, that. Massively appreciate it. It's Ian Bloom there, the media lawyer, reacting to a couple of different stories, one of which is very much breaking. I'll just reiterate what this is. A young person has told BBC News that they felt threatened by the BBC presenter at the centre of a row over payment for sexually explicit photos. Look, just to quickly recap, I've spoken to two lawyers here in the last 20 minutes or so, asked them what they would do if this individual was their client now. They both said it's absolutely vitally important that they know everything now, and everything that there is to know is said to them. Both of them then considered the idea that it is probably possibly time, to try to get ahead of this and have some kind of public statement or press conference, and that, I suspect, is a matter of time. Loads more on this story on our website, gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country, right because we do stories exactly like this. I've got the best analysis, big opinion, all the latest breaking news. Look, later this hour, I will speak to a former BBC executive about this afternoon's big breaking news. In fact, will there be more before now and the time I get to them? But first, it's your weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow and again. You will be dodging the downpour, some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still one or two heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Loads on. In just a few moments' time, I will get more on the breaking news that the unnamed BBC presenter is facing allegations that he sent abusive and threatening messages to a second young person, and just asking how much longer can this go on for, frankly. But here is a question for you. Would you open your doors and let a Channel migrant stay at your home? Well, that is one idea that's potentially being floated anyway by a think tank to reduce the £2.2 billion cost of keeping asylum seekers in hotels. Would you open your doors to an asylum seeker? See in the tick. Shortly, a former BBC executive joins me on the latest breaking lies to come out of this BBC presenter scandal. But here's a question for you. Would you open your doors and let a Channel migrant stay at your home? That is what a policy exchange think tank are loosely suggesting. They're talking more about those people with big houses in the leafy suburbs who pontificate about refugees' welcome. But to reduce the £2.2 billion cost of keeping asylum seekers in hotels, more than 13,000 migrants are now across the Channel in small boats this year, 1,500 since Friday. Let's be honest, it's probably going to be another record year. Let's get the view now of local government editor at Conservative Home. It's Harry Phipps. Harry, thank you very, very much. Essentially, is it time for posh people who claim to love refugees to put up or shut up?
I think that's a perfectly reasonable question, but I do think that there are two different things that keep getting muddled up, aren't there? That in terms of saying should we be tough or should we be soft? We should absolutely be completely tough in saying that we're an independent nation and we have control of our borders, and that there should be no possibility of anybody, under any circumstances, entering this country illegally, being able to stay. I think the Rwanda scheme is a perfectly good one. If other people have got alternatives, they can come up with them, but that should be absolutely clear. The second point is, should we choose to allow in refugees to the greatest extent that's practical, and that's what we've done through a proud history of it. And one practical point is to look at ways of doing that keeps the costs down. And if people have got spare rooms, and obviously a lot of Ukrainians have come. We hope temporarily. I'm sure they all hope they'll be able to go back to Ukraine soon.
Yeah, is this the difference, Harry? Let me just come
way of managing. So they're two completely different points, aren't there?
Well, yeah, but there's also two completely different points about the kind of people that we're talking about, Harry. You know, we've got women and children genuinely fleeing a war zone coming from Ukraine, and we've got undocumented men, in some cases claiming to be boys, frankly fleeing France. In the other case, there is a world of difference between those two groups of people, no?
Absolutely, and in terms of the people coming over from France, the answer is none of them. There shouldn't be a question of are they staying in a spare room, are they staying in a hotel. We need to be the government needs to be very clear if it needs to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, if it needs to put up with a rebellion among some Conservative MPs in the Commons. It needs to do whatever it takes to be absolutely strong and clear that people who come to this country illegally will not be allowed to stay. And that would, of course, put the people smugglers out of business. It would, in practice, be a huge deterrent. People wouldn't be very likely to keep trying to come here if they knew that was going to be the reality. So we should be absolutely tough on that. But I think that in terms of looking at practical ways, I mean, another point of the policy exchange thing was, policy exchange report was helping genuine refugees to learn to speak English. I think it's perfectly reasonable to try and find ways to ease the rules on them being able to work. Absolutely, it's better for them as well as for the taxpayer if people are in spare rooms in a family home rather than hotels. So absolutely, let's be practical about helping genuine refugees. Let's be absolutely clear, absolutely tough about saying nobody is allowed to come to this country illegally, only people who we welcome as genuine refugees.
But you know why I think that the Home Office would never actually go for this, or the government wouldn't, is because if they did decide to enact a policy that let anyone who wanted to, anyone with enough room, anyone with a heart, to allow Channel migrants to stay in their spare room, the government would then be on the hook for the potential consequences of that, and those consequences could stem from a reality that we don't know who a lot of these people are or what their criminal history is. And they are more than happy to plonk a load of these people in hotels in local communities, but they would be on the hook for millions of pounds worth of compensation when it all kicks off inside somebody's own front room.
Oh, look, I mean, you shouldn't be allowed to have someone in your spare room who's coming to the country illegally. By the way, I think it's completely understandable. We keep running down this country. We're a fantastic country. We've got 8 billion of us on the planet. We've got lots of people in countries where they're enslaved or impoverished with awful regimes. I think it's entirely understandable that a huge number of people would like to live here. The reality is, of course, even the Archbishop of Canterbury or the BBC or the Labour Party would probably accept that we can't fit everybody in. So therefore, it's a matter of how many people we can fit in, and what should the priority be? And the priority should not be to anybody just turning up to the people smugglers coming over the channel.
No, indeed. Look, Harry, thank you very much. Great stuff there. Harry Phibbs there, who is, of course, the local government editor at Conservative Home, reacting to a policy exchange report by the wonderful Dr. Akibo San, who was on earlier. Look, the whole point of that report was to say that the working class have absolutely suffered enough when it comes to the Channel migrant crisis. They're always plonking these hotels in predominantly working class areas, sacking people with working class jobs at hotels in order to make way for them. And you know what? It is time that posh people in massive houses with the EU flag outside their front door and the refugees welcome brigade, as I call them, put their money where their mouth is. Put up or shut up. But of course they won't, because they want the kind of Stepford wife-style illegal immigrant, don't they? One that's been completely vetted, one that is probably a woman and her child from Ukraine. But then when they are confronted with the reality of the kind of people who are coming across the channel, oh no, sorry, I suddenly don't have the room. Well, stop banging on about it then. Right, loads more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. There's the latest on the protest outside a hotel in South Wales. Here we go. I would argue that these are some working class heroes. 95 people have lost their jobs, 200 migrants are about to move in, and they've said absolutely not. They've barricaded themselves outside this hotel, and guess what? They've learnt the law and they've stuck to it, and they have now forced the police into, well, frankly anyway, guarding that hotel to make sure that nobody can come in or out of it. Rory Smith now there with your headlines.
Thank you very much, Patrick. A second person has come forward to make a complaint against the BBC presenter accused of paying for sexually explicit photos. The broadcaster says it spoke to a person in their early 20s who claims they were sent a number of threatening messages by the host. The person says they were put under pressure to meet the BBC star, but never did. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. A Romanian people smuggler has been jailed for 12 years and 7 months for the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants who were found dead in a container which had been transported from Belgium to Essex in 2019. 50-year-old Marius Dragici fled the country after the bodies were discovered. That's the up-to-date, but you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website. That is gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2901 and €1.1734. The price of gold is at £1,496 and 26 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 has closed at 7,282 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News, investments that matter.
Well, the BBC presenter at the centre of claims of inappropriate conduct is now facing a second set of allegations from a different young person. According to BBC News, the person is in their early 20s and was the subject of threatening and abusive messages after initially making contact on a dating app. This is a development to the initial story and is piling pressure on this idea, this question of whether or not the individual should now be named or would indeed name themselves. I'm joined now by a former BBC executive, Professor Tim Luckhurst. Thank you very much. Great to have you on. Do you think this individual should now come forward and name themselves?
I don't think that there's the remotest possibility that they will. And given the nature of our current privacy law, I don't think that they can be obliged to do so, or that they will be named by the BBC or by a newspaper. I suspect, however, that there is a possibility that a member of parliament might choose to use parliamentary privilege to identify the presenter in the House of Commons. That's a possibility. It's something that some Conservative MPs have been hinting at. I wouldn't encourage it, but it's certainly a possibility. Parliamentary privilege would allow them to do that and to face no consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on about that. And I think that it's a question of if this becomes a continual drip, then I think an MP may well end up taking it upon themselves. As a former BBC executive, what do the BBC do about this now?
Well, the BBC is really in the firing line now, and I think that's a great shame. The Director General did a fairly good job of answering questions today, but that was before this second set of allegations emerged. The second set of allegations does tend to give some support to the suggestion that there is something seriously wrong going on, that this presenter has got some serious questions to answer. And the BBC will be under a great deal of pressure to get those answers and put them in the public domain. That's going to be difficult because at the moment, the BBC's own inquiry has been stalled while the police decide whether there is anything criminal that they need to investigate. So I know that the Director General will be keen to get on and get answers inside the BBC, but at the moment he's waiting for the police to make decisions before he can do that.
No, indeed, and there is no question whatsoever that the Director General is under a huge amount of pressure, and the own internal policy at the BBC is now under the microscope as well. To act quickly, in light of the fact that just until about an hour ago, when the second draft of allegations came out, the talking point, if you will, was, well, why did it take the BBC around 2 months to essentially get their backsides in gear when it came to this? Well, now then this allegation comes out, one would assume that they would try to make a virtue out of how quickly they're reacting to it.
Well, the one thing that I thought the BBC's Director General was absolutely clear about in his statement today, or sorry, one thing about which he was very clear, was that he wanted to know why it had taken so long for the original complaint to reach the level in the BBC at which it could be taken seriously. One email and one telephone call in the course of 7 weeks doesn't look to me like a sufficient response to what must have been a fairly serious allegation. And the Director General acknowledges that it was a serious allegation. He said in his answer to questions today that he wanted to know whether or not the BBC's procedure had red flagged this complaint early enough. I think it's fairly clear that it didn't red flag it clearly early enough. It's now obviously the case that the BBC has got another serious complaint that it needs to look at, and hopefully that will be red flagged very quickly. The Director General will be able to get his teeth into it almost immediately.
Tim, thank you very much. Great stuff. Much appreciated. Tim Lockhurst is a former BBC executive professor. Tim Lockhurst, I demoted him there. How dare I? Right, OK, let's get to an update on a story that I covered extensively yesterday and earlier on in the show, because this is another developing story. The hotel in Llanelli in South Wales, where 95 staff have lost their jobs ahead of the arrival of more than 200 migrants. So protesters have now started to erect marquees, which you're looking at now if you're watching us on your telly or online, outside the Stradey Park Hotel. Organisers say that they've been provided with food as they continue to fight the decision to house asylum seekers there. I am joined now by Dan Morgan from the Voice of Wales group. Dan, thank you very, very much. It's great to have you on the show. Dan, look, what is going on there? This is now, I mean, I've heard that they were trying to deliver beds to this hotel. That's been blocked by the sheer volume of the public saying no to it. Well, look, what's the latest from the scene?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that they've got at the moment is the numbers. The numbers are there and they are able to hold the line, so to say. Now, the interesting thing with this example is, as you mentioned earlier on, the land going into the hotel isn't owned by the hotel. So the police have to abide by the law and not let people trespass onto the land. So it's a bit of a sticking point at the moment where we are. But all I can say regarding the protesters is that the numbers are growing. It's only getting bigger. And what started off as, you see them boulders there in the video, just the boulders, has now gone to tents, gazebos, marquees, generators, fridges, kettles, food, endless amounts of food. So, and these people are staying there in 24-hour shifts. And, you know, then there's a relief crew in the morning. So they're very well organised. And yeah, they've got a real fight on their hands.
Look at some of those signs there. Save our community, house our homeless first. These are exactly the kind of things that people up and down the country are saying. But the difference between what's going on there where you are and what's going on in a variety of different towns at the moment is that you have acted on it quickly enough, right? And this actually could be almost like a legal precedent, whereby the sheer weight of public opinion and the effort that you're all going to would stop an asylum seeker hotel popping up in an area. Is it not a shame that it's come to this?
Oh, it's the fact that's even come to this is unbelievable. It's totally ridiculous. And you know the difference you've got in Llanelli where you are, where they are now, is this is still a community. It's still a small community. Everybody knows each other. Everybody is, you know, they can contact each other whenever they want. Throughout Wales, the community spirit, so to say, has been totally destroyed by Welsh Labour. In bigger cities, these hotels are everywhere. Cardiff is full of them. But there's no pushback because there's no community spirit left anymore. When you go to a small town of 400 people like Furness, where the hotel is, and you're getting 1,000 people on the streets, close to 1,000 yesterday, you know, that's community spirit, and that is what they really have on their side here. And you see the arrests that were happening, the police, you know, they don't really know the complications that they're getting themselves in, because this community will fight for each other and they're prepared to go the distance. We've seen a number of arrests. Yesterday there was arrests, and it's just crazy. It's just crazy how, you know, it's even got to this point in the first place. And these people are seeing now firsthand exactly how the politicians, their representatives, the committee members are actually acting for them, which is they're not. They're totally not.
No, and I think people are starting to get a bit of a taste of their own medicine. Right up and down the country right now, we are witnessing completely unsuitable sites being used in a very clandestine manner, where people essentially wake up one morning to find out that their local hotel, which may well have been a major source of income for that local area, has been secretly, essentially bought in a roundabout way, bought off anyway, by the Home Office, to be used, and those asylum seekers are in there. And that is it. But what has happened in your area is that people have looked at the law, they've looked at the deeds of this particular hotel, they've seen the land registry, they've seen that there's a private road there. Now, as I understand it, there is only one way into that hotel, am I right in saying, and that is through a bush, which is now the bush now has a police escort, does it?
Yeah, it's been coined as the most well-protected bush in Great Britain right now. It's the way in and the way out of the hotel, because the sheer volume of people on the main front entrance, it's impossible to get through. So that bush is the only in and out that the staff, the security that they've got there are able to use. Now, that was a big point. You know, the protesters were blocking that as well. They were linked. One of them chained themselves to a post allegedly, and you know, so but then that is the lengths they're willing to go to. They're willing to go the distance to make sure that, you know, the fight, they're not just going to lay down. You know, they're showing their politicians who haven't been there for them. They've said that they're against this, which is correct. They are against this. Everybody's against this. But what they're not saying is that they want to put them in houses. So they want to give them priority housing. You know, the Welsh government voted like 20 days ago, I think, against the migration bill, you know, to make it illegal for anybody to, if they cross, they can't gain asylum. Now, you know, they can't preach Wales being a nation of sanctuary, and then when it happens, complain because it's on their doorstep. You know, it just seems like, you know, a bit hypocritical from the Welsh Labour government that we have to be voting in favour of this constantly. Well, this is and then when it happens, then they're not happy about it.
Well, no, this is it. We are now living, as ordinary people, in the nightmare of what 650 MPs and however many members of the House of Lords, the mess that they have created by not being able to get their backsides in gear and deal with the situation and continually fighting and arguing about it. It's all very well and good for them arguing in a nice cushy chamber with the taxpayer subsidised restaurants and bars around the corner there. Well, whilst they can't pull their fingers out and get it sorted, people like you and the local community around your area there are having to take time off work to try to save their local community from this absolute madness. But look, Dan, thank you very much, and keep up the good work, my good man, and I'll be talking to you very soon, no doubt. It's Dan Morgan there from the Voice of Wales. That's going to carry on. They are not moving, And at some point, the Home Office and the hotelier is going to have a decision to make, which is whether or not they essentially take a battering ram to a group of Welsh people to get them out of the way in order to get a load of asylum seekers in. And I'm just not sure they're going to do that. But yes, a reminder of this afternoon's big breaking news. The BBC presenter at the centre of the claims of inappropriate conduct is facing a second set of allegations from a different young person. The big question is, what next, isn't it? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The 12th, a day to celebrate history, community and family here in Northern Ireland. Join me, Arlene Foster.
And me, Dougie Beattie, as we bring you live coverage of the July 12th celebrations from the beautiful city of Belfast.
And right across the United Kingdom. It's all happening here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
More explosive allegations about an as-yet unnamed BBC star, this time from a second young person who has come out to say that they have received threatening messages after they alluded that they might out the individual in question. I am joined now by PR and branding expert Mark Borkowski. Mark, thank you very, very much. This very much has the feel of a drip, drip, drip story to it. If you are representing the individual in question, as yet unnamed, of course, what's your advice? Do you think that no matter what happens now, there is any coming back from this?
Well, it seems ridiculous to even begin to think of what sort of advice you'd give this individual. I mean, look, part of the issue, Patrick, and when you're dealing with a crisis, is you're hoping that your client tells you the full story. Unfortunately, there are occasions where your client can't face the reality of the situation, and they hide back the truths. I don't know enough about this because really the story is the story. It's unfolding. And if you look at the way the BBC are handling it, and it just feels that there's a heavy touch of lawyers on this. The press conference today, or the press briefing today with the Director General, Tim Davie, he said very little. It was excruciating in terms of that. I mean, he even admitted that he hadn't spoken to the person at the centre of this, which I would have thought he needs to do. And that suggested again that there was a certain amount of sort of protection. Look, the BBC is deeply wounded. The reputation is shot. If there's any positivity out of this, is actually the news organisation itself is actually breaking the story.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you would expect. I mean, with respect, if GB News had beaten the BBC to this as well, you would have to start asking some serious questions about the quality of news gathering, because they're not having to look very far for it, I suppose. Look, in terms of the BBC's brand, right, and the licence fee, etc. What now? Does this actually have a material impact on that, do you think?
Well, of course it has. I don't know about the licence fee, but in terms of, you know, the trust and the epic. Look, we've seen, you know, since Savile, you know, we've had the Cliff Richard issue, we've had Martin Bashir. I mean, you know, the BBC is deeply wounded, and they're trying to deal with this crisis with a baseball bat, with everybody else has got machine guns. It's not good. And in fact, the Director General at that press conference admitted it wasn't good. And the due processes they have in place seem to be 20th century. They don't seem to be 21st century, when social media and the world supposedly knows. You know, press reported that 1 in 6 people, I don't know how they make this calculation, in this country knows the story. But if that is the case, sooner or later there has to be a strategy from the person in the centre of this to actually think about how they're coming out. But at the moment, you know, there's no legalities that are questioned, and it's, you know, we have to ask that question: is it interesting, or is it, you know, is it of public interest?
This is it. Look, Mark, thank you very much. Short and sweet. I'm afraid that's the nature of it. But it's Mark Borkowski there, is a PR and brand expert. 3 issues at play here. There's questions over legality. There's questions over morals, of course, as well, and there's questions over alleged threatening behaviour. I think everybody who thought and maybe hoped this story was going to go away is looking very, very silly now. Jubes and Co next.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow, and again you will be dodging the downpour. Some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still one or two heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.